Welcome back to Ageless Rage. This is Dr. Stephen Bracci, where we talk about agelessness and the rage that we have in the system that we have in this country and how we're aging. So the rage isn't at, obviously, it's not at the people, but it's at the system that facilitates all the suffering that's going on. So there's a clarity in that. And I have my esteemed guest back, High Energy Voltage. She is a pioneer when it comes to wellness. She started one of the first wellness programs in a spa that she owned in the way back in the 70s, and she was a pioneer from many fronts. And her whole thing was that she improved people's energy and decreased their weight. So she was a forefront in that. Today's subject is something that is very dear to her, and it's about this concept of addiction. And this conversation is very germane to the whole issue of aging in America, because as America goes along and this country ages, we're suffering more and more. And one of the big things that's making us suffer now is this whole thing of addiction. And we have more drug overdoses now in this country than ever, opioids and methamphetamines. We have lost over 100,000 people in the past years per year, and that does not speak to the overall condition of what that addiction is doing, not only to the people in terms of their life expectancy, but also their health expectancy, and how that's facilitating a lot of disability, and how people are losing mental capacity, how they're getting physically disabled, how they're suffering because of this. So there's a lot of suffering that goes beyond just that statistic of life and death. And then not to mention what that does to the families and the family relationships, and how that ultimately feeds a lot of the prison population, and how that feeds into all of that. So we have a whole thing, this whole industry that's around this. And my esteemed guest, she's had first-hand experience, because how she entered into the wellness arena is when she realized from the very beginning that when she was taking drugs and she got off drugs and she became sober, she realized the parallels between drug addiction and sugar addiction, and that spurred her to make changes in herself, and then eventually help other people with those changes on an individual basis. And how many celebrities she's helped through the years gain energy and, like you said, lose weight. So Voltage, give me your thoughts on addiction, and give me your thoughts on how you first approached addiction with the sugar, and then how you had it, what your thoughts are today, and how we're becoming addicted as a country, and what we can do about it.
Well, this is very close to my heart for many reasons that I never spoke about until quite recently. As we've said, I recognize the sugar addiction because I recognize the behavior. And I was very, clear on that. But what brought me to becoming so passionate about sugar addiction is because I really understood addiction. And when I first, all my friends from my youth, I was the head dancer at the Whiskey A Go-Go. The Doors were the house band. My boyfriend was a big drug dealer, so, anything I wanted was there by the pound. It's not like I had to go out and get involved with anything, which sounds like, but it's really not amazing for somebody with my kind of brain chemistry. Some people can actually do things recreationally. Some people can eat a couple pieces of cake and forget about it, and there's other people like me, and there's millions of us. So when I got sober for the first time, my brain chemistry, when I was dancing on the disco and I got that shot of natural opiates, which is God's opiate, that runner's high. That's how I named high voltage. Oh my God, it's like I'm high, and I put, and then Murray the K's mother, a lady who wrote Splish Splash, I was taking a bath, gave me a gold nail with a diamond chip lightning bolt on it. So between me dancing on the dance floor, looking at that little lightning bolt is kind of how that all came together. But something that I never spoke about, and again, I've just been divinely led or something. Most people didn't have access to being helped the way I was by certain people. So I was having a lot of trouble holding on to that. Like, even when I came out of the second hospital, like I used to always go to spas until I graduated to, and back then it's not a 28-day program, 28 days. It doesn't do it, it's an insurance thing. It's not a reality thing. But when I really started trying to hurt myself and cut myself and put cigarettes out, I never tried to hurt other people, but I was really trying, but I didn't understand any of this because I didn't get high. My group just was high. Nobody thought they had a drug problem back then at all. We didn't get high once in a while. We were up 3, 4, 5. I mean, I don't know how anybody got on stage, let alone, I mean, it was just, drugs, sex, and rock and roll was not a bumper sticker. It was a lifestyle. And I just lived in Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles in the middle of it. So when I got sober, I really didn't know how to live, but I was lucky enough because I, had a husband with a lot of money that I could afford to go, to the original places like Silver Hill. I used to tell people I used to summer in Greenwich, Connecticut, and they would serve, high tea with white gloves on. I mean, I was there for 9 months. Who was there while Cher put it on the map because Greg Allman was there. And it was just, everybody was there getting sober, but you didn't take it as serious. The second time, when it was very serious, I was in a lockup ward for quite some time. And when I got out of the hospital, they said to my husband, "You're probably not strong enough yet to really just be in New York." That's how I went to the Harbor Island Spa, and all of that happened. I ended up taking it over with the wife. But after a while, I couldn't hold on to the sobriety as easily. And one of my girlfriends, I was just with her, and I went with her to meet her boyfriend, who happened to be a pioneer in methadone. And we're sitting in his office. I mean, she wasn't a patient, it was her boyfriend. And there was a chart on the wall, something about opiates and that some people need, that have damaged their brain, need a certain amount just to function normally, not to get high, to be normal. I'd never heard that, I'd never seen that, and I swear to God, it was like somebody smacked me with something. And I looked at that and I said, oh my God, that's me. And then he didn't know my story, I was his girlfriend's friend. And when I started talking to him and he explained it to me, I mean, this is a long time ago. All the time that I've had my career, and I never spoke about it, but I always said, if anybody asks me, I will tell them. But while I'm creating everything that I'm doing, and I'm telling you, people that knew me well, that I moved in with it, I mean, nobody knew I didn't lie about it. I don't drink alcohol. I've never had a drink of alcohol, I think, for 40 years. But they never asked me about that part. I mean, they would ask, period, you're really passionate about this. Well, there's another part to this, that I could not be who I am today and function on the high level that I do if I did not have somebody that made sure I had that little bit of opiate that I needed.
So basically, the premise is that we have in the medical community is that if you take enough external opioids, not natural, but external opioids, you basically burn out all these opioid receptors, and we need some, just like diabetes.
Yeah,
just
yeah,
like
that's
diabetes,
the analogy
we need
he used.
insulin.
That's the
and
analogy
so what
he used.
happens is when you burn these receptors out, and you don't have enough to function properly, you can't supply enough opioids to satisfy your brain's normal chemistry. So you need external opioids, a steady state of it. And that's why we have the Suboxones and the methadones and everything that we have to, because people can't function. Tell me, what would happen?
That's why I created my own AA, because my thing didn't fit in. Alcoholics Anonymous, if you take
Didn't fit
anything,
in.
it's a, yeah.
Because
That's
you
why
need
I created.
that, right? Alcohol Anonymous, they need to stay off completely sobriety,
Right.
but you medically are chemically dependent on a drug that, because your brain chemistry and your receptors have been permanently altered, you need that just to survive.
And that's not a bad thing.
It isn't a bad thing because you're functioning.
Well, functioning high, because periodically
functioning.
people would say,
Right.
Voltage, I've never met anybody with your past, because when I describe how we lived, I'm not exaggerating, that you I don't just function, I function on a very high level, and I have, but it's not just taking the methadone or the Suboxone,
Right.
it's not drinking alcohol, it's getting your sleep, it's eating clean. You need to do the whole thing.
The whole thing.
But anybody, no matter how you've damaged your brain, because they put you on these things, but the goal is to get you off,
Right.
not to stay on. You know, Dr. Carcass, was Upper East Side, right off Park Avenue, was the place for the rock stars and of the era and the fame. There's doctors and lawyers and people like me who've been on this their entire lives, but they would never say it
No.
because there's such a
A
backlash.
stigma.
A stigma, and that's why I never brought it up. But I always, the way I kind of dealt with it for my own sanity was, but if anybody ever asks me, I'll tell them. You and I were discussing business, and we were in a restaurant, and out of nowhere, you looked at me in the eyes. We were just talking. We always talk that way. You went like, "Are you on methadone?" I'm like, "Well, I'm sitting under the Buddha." We were in that restaurant with the big Buddha, and my eyes blinked a few times because my head's going, "Oh." I said it, because that was how I made it okay with me, that if somebody asks, of course, I'll tell them. And then I just blurted the whole thing out to you, like I'd never done that in 40 years.
Well, the reason why we're having these conversations is like we did in a prior episode, we talked about end of life and how things go and how people who have a certain lifestyle can end up with long-term disabilities or more likely to and suffer. And in your case, we can talk about what the substances did to your brain and what are the consequences, but more importantly, what could be done about them.
Yes.
How you can manage that, and you can turn that around.
And
Because
thrive.
a lot of people are giving up hope and they think it's fruitless to engage in these healthy lifestyles because they've been victimized
Exactly.
by the drug
Exactly.
epidemic. And I think one of the things that you do so well is you take your narrative and your experience of what you've done and basically tell people, this is where I am. I was this person. I was on the drug culture. I was in this. I went through mental illness. I had breakdowns. I was hospitalized. I was self-harming. I was bulimic. I was anorexic. I was basically all of the mental illnesses, major mental illness you could think about. You
I
were
experienced.
there, but you were able to turn that around.
I mean, it's a
You were
miracle.
able to turn that around.
And not, because the big thing in sobriety is surviving. It doesn't matter if you're 200 pounds, as long as you're not using. I mean, most AA meetings is all cookies and candy, so that was the other problem I had with that.
Right. They're giving you another drug. They're
Because-
substituting.
When that book was written, the big book in AA,
Right.
they weren't aware that sugar is a drug, to be quite honest with you. Otherwise, I do not believe. Because they will say in AA, if you're having a hard day, have some sugar, it will help.
Well,
You know?
that brings to our whole conversation. People don't understand that it's not uncommon for people who come off drugs and alcohol, who sobriety, who turn to sugars and get very heavy.
Exactly. But that's okay in
and
that
that's
world.
okay.
Right.
But
it's not.
But it's not. And then the other extreme, it's not uncommon people who go through weight loss, bariatric surgery, who then go the opposite and they turn to drugs and alcohol because now they're not getting their drug of choice. They have to substitute for another.
Absolutely.
And I'm not blaming them.
No.
But I think society has to understand this from an addiction perspective, because we're not going to solve these problems if we don't identify for what it is.
Well, absolutely.
And the commonality behind it all, because they think it's two entirely separate things. And in my brain, it looks like it's just different elements of the same thing.
Exactly. And because there was such a backlash, about it, Katie Quirk was one of my dearest people and, allowed me to get involved, to create this program for inner city girls and, do so many amazing things. I mean, people I spent lots of time with, no idea. I mean, it just never came up. So after you asked me that question, then I had to talk about it, because after I did it with you, so I called Katie and the two doctors that Katie introduced me to that helped me create Energy from the medical point. Two of the hottest, sexiest, coolest doctors, just amazing. And I wanted to you asking that question made me want to step up. So I got all of them together and, it took me a few minutes to bring it up, and they, Katie, just spit it out. What are you trying to say, voltage? And I said, well, all this time, you know, and I kind of told them how you asked me this question. I said, I've been on methadone or Suboxone, depending on the timing, and I just didn't know what you'd think about the First Lady of Energy being on Suboxone and all of this time. And I was lucky enough to, you know, Dr. Karkas supported me, you know, because I lived so clean. I do live that clean. That's very, very real. But I needed that chemical to make my brain chemistry work, because surviving never worked for me. I always want to thrive. You know, they kind of teach you,
Right.
if you're surviving, you're good. Well,
Right.
I like to thrive, and I like to, you know, just get stronger. But I was never able to, I never would talk about that because, you know, of what, you know, could be said. But Katie said to me, and my doctor said to me, said, look, Voltage, maybe 10 years ago, you know, there would still be, you know, quite a stigma, and you'll be attacked and just torn down in the media, you know. They said, but you have found another path to sobriety. I live clean, and in my mind, I have no trouble saying I am sober, but I am sober with a pharmaceutical, you know, help in a sense. And that may be very hard for some people to look at, but all I will say back to them is, look at my life, how I live, and this is available to anybody who has destroyed their life through drugs,
Right.
if you're willing to
Right.
live this way. You don't take methadone or Suboxone, you know, go out drinking, eating. I mean, no, that does not. That's why methadone has such a bad name, because the people that use it for how it's meant to be used and thrive and add to society, they don't talk. The only ones they see are the ones that are still drinking, selling the methadone
Right.
for other
Right.
drugs.
They don't see the ones that are high functioning.
They don't know it
And-
exists.
And the big message taken here is that despite all of your troubles with all the drug culture and all the addiction, you were able to turn that around, get yourself healthy, find a medication that supports your brain chemistry, and live a very healthy, productive life.
Healthy, passionate life.
That's an achievement. And I think the message is that we think of age with disability, and despite the things that your brain has been through.
Yes.
You had suicide attempts.
Oh, yeah.
You had hospitalizations, bulimia, anorexia, self-harm, all of these things, and you were able to turn it around and not only help yourself, but you're able to help other people.
And
And
I
you're-
want to add a group to that, because the people who, from the drug addiction part, don't really, well, any drug addict just changing their eating, you know, plant-based life, getting their sleep, not drinking alcohol, can feel better. But and they can survive, but I don't believe they can thrive. I mean, if you're willing to
Correct.
go for it, as
Correct.
I have and I did, and the passion that goes with it,
Correct.
I protect my energy.
Correct.
I mean, I just, when I see people drinking, it doesn't make me want to join them.
No.
After the second drink, people that I love and start slurring, and,
Right.
you feel bad for them. I go
Well,
home.
you feel bad for them.
Yeah, I'm not,
Right.
judging them, but it's like, So, but if I didn't have that chemical to help me, I don't believe I would be me. I don't think I'd be sitting here.
And it's supports the notion that even people who are diabetics who can't survive without insulin or a chemical support system to their diabetes, but they still can turn their life around. They still can thrive.
Absolutely,
They can still get more
absolutely.
fit. They can have more mental clarity. They can experience and age more successfully. That's the
With
key.
passion
With
and-
passion and
yes.
success. And that is my biggest challenge, is that we are really suffering, and drugs are a big part of this. We're suffering in the way we age. We're not aging successfully. And that's where I have the rage from, is because we're not measuring the success of aging. We're only measuring the life, the number of years lived, which is actually not doing so well anyway. I think it's going in reverse. It's stagnant at best, where life expectancy is 76 years old, and I don't think that is a good number. I think it should be 126, not 76.
But still gardening. I like the 100-year-old person that goes over in the garden because they were gardening, or
Right,
whatever.
right, where they come back from
Yeah.
a hike and then they rest and they their rest is a terminal rest. That's
Well, I think that's how it's kind of meant to be.
that's-
But government can't
They're
fix
not
this.
on them, and look,
We have
talked
to fix
about-
it. We have to
talked
fix
about
it.
this. When I talk to people, I ask them about, do you want to be on the machine, and and very few people want to be on machines for any length of time. If that's their existence and that's permanent, that they need to live on a ventilator and a machine, that's a lot of people
Well,
don't
that's
want
the
to live
highway they're on. They're on the super highway, to that ending. And it's not, look, we can only do that ourselves. I mean, that's not government's job. I mean, we have to take responsibility for our health, for our everything, and not blame this one did it or that one did, even if they make it hard. I mean, it's hard for all of us because so much is fed to us to live a certain way.
It is fed.
But you can break that.
Right. And the parallels I take from this is that the way drugs are fed to people and the way things happen to young people is very unfortunate. And I think I take a lot of parallels to the way society is feeding and normalizing certain foods to people, specifically highly processed, ultra-processed foods and sugars, how that's normalized. They're basically one in parallel. They're not separate entities. They're parallel universes, and they're basically similar and going on the same way. And I'm very saddened about that, as you are. So I'm very appreciative of having my guest, Voltage, and I'm very admirable. It's very admirable how she's turned her life around, how she's managed to, with all these addictions and all these chemical dependencies, how she's turned her life around, and she's a testament to successful aging. And I want to thank you again for coming on to the show, and continue to welcome our listeners to catch us on Spotify and Apple Podcast and Instagram. Thanks again.
And I want to thank you for asking me a very important question that allowed me to finally bring everything
And I
up.
want to thank you for sharing that, because that gives hope to a lot of people who are in despair and feel like there's no option and they should be in hiding. And I think you are admiration and really somebody who everybody should look up to.
Energy up.
Energy up.
Woo!